Today I am joined by Olyroos defender Jordan Perez. Thank you so much for joining me today, Jordan.
No worries, anytime.
So I told you before we recorded this interview that my interviews are always pretty laid back. And I think my first question is probably the easiest, most laid back question you could ever receive. Just where did your passion and love for football first begin?
Look, as soon as I could walk, I was kicking a football. I loved watching, I loved doing it. Anything to do with running, kicking, I wanted to do it since I could walk. So now, obviously, growing up and understanding it, you love it even more.
And everyone sort of has that dream of being a professional athlete, whether or not it's a cricket player, swimmer, footballer. For you, did you always have that dream of being a professional footballer, or did you maybe play something like cricket, rugby league, union, AFL, one of the many sports we have to choose from in Australia?
No, ever since the beginning, like I said, since I could walk, it was always a football. Always a football. Anything round, whether it was a piece of paper, I would make it into a ball and kick it around. Even one time I was on a holiday with my family, I would kick a coconut. It was always football, always.
And
Yeah.
that dream of becoming a professional football is one that I think many of us, when we're a kid, we have the dream, maybe scoring a goal in the World Cup final or playing for our favorite team. But the older we get, we realize that maybe it's a bit unrealistic. For you, that dream's actually sort of become a reality. So, when was the moment when you realized that chasing football could be a realistic career path? Or was there never a moment? Was it one of those things? Often I talk to players, they say they just kept making rep teams, and then all of a sudden they're in professional football. Was that the case for you?
Um, Look, in the beginning, it was more just I was playing, I loved what I did, I was progressing, and at one point, I got a call to move to Spain in an academy, and that's when obviously you have to make a decision. Am I ready to leave home and pursue this, or is it something that I'm just going to do for fun? And I made a decision with my parents at 14 years old that I want to do this. I love what I do. I think one day I could be good enough. And now looking back at it, the decision was best decision I made. It paid off. So yeah.
Now we'll talk about Spain in just a moment, but one thing I always like to talk about with goalkeepers and defenders is whether or not a lot of them have a similar story. For example, they tell me they started off playing as a striker or attacking midfielder and then slowly went back throughout the team and ended up as a defender. Is the story similar to you, or were you always, a defender?
So in my early youth days, so maybe 9, 10 years old, I was a left back. I started off as a left back. And as I got into 11s through to maybe until I left Spain, I was a striker, winger, something along that line, sometimes a number 10. And then now, since I moved to Cyprus, my old club, my ex-club, moved me back to a fullback. And since then, I haven't looked back. So I'm happy about that decision.
And you mentioned the decision, going from playing football for fun to playing football, in terms of chasing it as a career. Going from obviously playing football for fun back in Australia to going into these academies in Spain, we all know what a good football nation Spain is. What were some of the big things that you learned when you first joined these academies, that it's set to try and make you a professional? What are the big things you learned, and what were some of the difficulties that you had, when you first arrived there?
Well, the difficulties, I mean, one, I didn't know a word of Spanish. So talking, trying to communicate with people. I mean, over there in Tarragona, which is where I live, or south of Barcelona, not many people spoke English. So I was kind of stuck. So one, you get chucked into that environment where you have to try and communicate, you have to try and say how you're feeling. Even in football terms, you can't just scream in English. I don't know what you're talking about. So in that sense, the communication was difficult. Also, the fact, obviously, leaving home at such a young age, leaving your parents behind, leaving your life behind, the school aspect as well. It was in Spanish, so you have to learn this and that. So it was difficult. But the differences in football, I mean, the maturity of football in Spain, I mean, you can't get much better than that. So the coaching, the training, the intelligence, it made me grow into a different player, and I would never look back and say that was a bad decision. I think as a football wise and as a person, best decision ever in terms of growth. So yeah.
And did you find that when you first moved to Spain, the fact that you're Australian, and I know Australia is not really considered a footballing nation by many in Europe, do you think maybe people had a different perspective on what type of player you were and maybe underestimated you a little bit based on the fact solely that you're Australian?
For sure. Obviously, like you said, Australia isn't known for football. So when they see an Australian player coming to Spain, going into their house, on their field, not even be able to communicate with them, they looked at you like an outsider. But obviously, as you get to know them, as especially as your teammates, you gain a family even if you can't communicate. And that's in any team. With the national team, when you go and you meet the boys, with a new team, when you sign for a new club, it's always weird in the beginning with communication barriers. With not even if you can speak the same language, you don't know how to communicate with each other. It could be a little bit awkward, weird, uncomfortable, but eventually, you open up, you get to create friendships. I still have friends from Spain that moved away from home 6, 7 years ago, and I still communicate with them to this day. So it always works out in the end.
Now, communication is very important for a defender, especially, and you are a very well-spoken person, as you could tell probably from watching this interview. You're very well-spoken. But when you were first learning Spanish and you didn't know really too many phrases, and you're in a match where you had to communicate, what were your first sort of go-to phrases that you would shout out if you needed help or if you needed something done? Did you have any?
You know what? I would just scream and I would point to the player. I wouldn't even know their names yet in the beginning. You're trying to learn them, you're trying to understand who is who. So you would just scream and you would point your finger at where they need to go or move your hand or something, and it would work. So as long as it worked, it didn't matter.
And where you are now, Cyprus is obviously a lot different to Spain and Australia. It's a place where actually a few Australians have played before, and the league quality is, I've heard, very good. I interviewed a guy called Matt Derbyshire who played in the Premier League. He also played in Cyprus, and he pretty much went on for about 20 minutes about how good the level in Cyprus is. But before we get on to all that, just how did this move to Cyprus come about?
So the move to Cyprus came about because of personal issues that happened in Spain. Stuff to do with the club, stuff to do with the factors in the club, but also the fact of COVID played a massive role in it. So a lot of things happened, and one led to another. Had a contact in Cyprus, and managed to get a deal up here. And honestly, a lot of people say that Cyprus is a little bit backward step from Spain, which is understandable for them to think Spain is a giant. But for me, coming here and you look at the level and you look at the quality, I mean, the clubs get in Champions League, Europa League. We're putting up fights against Real Betis, where one of the clubs here just only lost 1-0 to them a few days ago. So people really underestimate the level here. So for me, it was a really positive move to actually come to such a country.
And before moving to Cyprus, how much did you actually know about the country? And was there anything, whether or not it's food or language or anything that may have been a bit of a culture shock to you when you first arrived?
So my mother's background is actually Cypriot. So for me to come here was actually sort of a good thing. I have some distant family. I understood a little bit of the country because I've been here on a holiday previously. So lifestyle wise, I knew how it was. I knew how I was going to be able to live, and I needed to learn the language. Uh, but no, it's a lovely place. I'm happy about it, and yeah, I wouldn't change it if I had the choice.
And what about the food? I always like to ask footballers about the food. Is there any Cypriot foods that you would recommend to anyone if they come across it or if they happen to be in Cyprus for whatever reason?
Look, you can never go wrong with some souvlakia or souvla that they call it in Cyprus. It's pork and chicken. You go to any Cypriot restaurant, you just ask for souvla or souvlakia and they'll give it to you. It's no problem.
Now, back onto the football pitch, your new club. I asked you how to pronounce it before we started, but I'm going to mess it up anyway. Olympiakos Nicosia. Apologies to any
Okay.
Cypriot people for the butchering of that. They're a big club. They've got some big players on their roster. I was actually just having a look through on the transfer market page. There's some quality there. How have you settled into the dressing room there so far?
Honestly, in the beginning, I was a little bit intimidated because of the level that was there. I mean, there's Cypriot national team players that have played for years there against massive names. Stefan, six, played in Champions League and Europa League for many years. Uh, but now I consider myself really integrated with the team. I have a really good relationship with almost everyone in the squad. I have a very good relationship with the club itself, with the president, with the committee. So no, it's not a thing of I have quality players around me that I should be intimidated or hide in a corner or not speak to them. We have a really good relationship between everyone, which is really important for how we're going in the season.
Well, that's always good to hear. And I mentioned in the introduction, probably because I couldn't really pronounce your club's name, you do play for the Olyroos as well, which is absolutely massive. When you first got the call up for the national team to be able to wear the green and gold, do you remember what you were doing and what was your first reaction?
Look, when you get the message on your phone about making the squad, not even just being on the list for the monitoring of to check how you are. I mean, you're on the list, the final squad list. You don't know really what to do. You kind of look at it and you're in disbelief because, at 14, I decided to get my bags, move overseas to chase a dream. And, the first time I got that final list and I was on it, it was like a shock. It was like what I decided to do was starting to pay off. And I honestly, the first time I got it, I looked at my phone, I sat there and I just started to cry, really. And I had my mum in the room with me, and she said, "What's going on?" And I showed her the phone. I couldn't even speak. And she also started crying. So it was a really emotional moment for me. It's something that I'll always cherish. I have the first ever jersey I wore hung up in my room, the match worn one. All the dirt is still on it against Netherlands. So yeah, really emotional moment for me that was.
It's absolutely amazing to hear. A lot of players I speak to when they talk about going into the national team camps, they talk about just how different it is to what you experience at club level. But I also hear a lot of stories about boys who may have not even met or may even meet just once or twice a year, but you have that instant bond. So, what was your experience like in the national team camps compared to, your regular club training camps and everything like that? Was it exactly how I described, or was it a different experience for you?
No, as soon as you get there, you start to integrate yourself with the boys. You start to get to know each other, tell your stories. Not even just about football, it becomes just you as a person. When you're gonna play some of the best teams in the world, you have such a quick turnover to have a good relationship and good chemistry. So it's something that is important, but you do it by yourself. It's not forced. Like I'm still in contact with some of the boys now from the last camp, like Josh Rawlins and Yaya, Denchi. So you keep good contact with them, and as soon as you go back into camp and they're there, it's like you guys never left each other.
And you did just mention a moment ago you have that kit hanging up in your room on your wall from your first ever match. But on that first ever match, personally, how do you think you went during that game? And do you remember much about the match, or was it just really a blur to you?
That camp we played against Utrecht, which was my first match, and the second one was against Netherlands. The first match with Utrecht, I was you don't know really what to feel. You feel like you're doing your job. You're happy with what you're doing. You feel such a great emotion that you're wearing green and gold. You're representing your country. but also at the same time, it's what you got to do. It's what you love to do. It's what you got to do. It's what you're there for. So in that moment, you go out there and you give everything you can, and then after the game, you reflect on the game yourself. You do your analysis, but also you take in the fact that okay, I just did do that. I got to be proud of myself. My performance in Utrecht, it could have been better. I did okay. The second one with Netherlands, I feel like I shined a little bit more. I did my thing, created one of the goals we scored against Netherlands as well. So yeah, big moment.
It's always good to happen. And I'm going to be honest with you, it's quite difficult to watch a lot of Cypriot football in Australia. And I know when these Olyroos camps come out, a lot of people were kind of questioning, who is this Jordan Perez guy? He looks decent, but we don't really know much about him. So I'm going to give you the opportunity for anyone who's curious just who is Jordan Perez and what type of footballer he is. How would you describe yourself?
Honestly, I think my biggest trait is how passionate I am for whoever I'm playing for, whether it be club, country. I mean, I put on the jersey and I die for that team. I run until I can't run anymore. I fight until I can't. I'll play even with one leg if I have to. So for me, it's just about my passion and love for what I do. So I don't I'm not gonna say to people I'm the most technical, I'm the best at shooting, I'm the best at crossing. For me, I will go and I will do the best I can for whoever I need to do it for. And that's who Jordan Perez is.
That's a great answer. And personally, I hope we can see some of that passion and commitment for the Socceroos in the future. But for now, thank you so much for joining me tonight or today where you are. And I hope you
Yeah.
have a good night.
Thank you. You too. Thank you very much for having me.